Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the TCEQ Transient Non-Community Water System Compliance Notebook webinar. My name is Alexander Hins, and I will be your moderator today. If you did not receive a hard copy of the Transient Non-Community Water System Compliance Notebook, you should have received an electronic version via email when you registered. We also have an electronic copy posted on the TCEQ registration page for this event. We are offering up to 2 hours of CEUs for attending this webinar, and that's for water operator licenses only. Please take a moment to click on the attendance form in the live event Q&A on the right side of the screen and fill it out. If you don't see the Q&A, you can turn it on by clicking the question mark icon on the top right of the screen. Only our presenters and myself will be able to speak at today's webinar, but you can use the Q&A function to ask a question at any time. We will do our best to answer your questions in the Q&A during the webinar. If you have site-specific questions, send an email to pwshelp@tceq.texas.gov, and that email address should also be in the Q&A. We have 2 presenters today, Heather O'Keefe and Haley Davidson, both with our Small Business and Local Government Assistance section. In between the presentations, we will take a 10-minute break. And now I would like to introduce our first speaker, Heather O'Keefe.
All right, thanks, Alex. Let me get to my presentation real quick. Okay, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. As Alex mentioned, my name is Heather O'Keefe, and I'm a compliance specialist with the Small Business and Local Government section. Today's webinar will focus on rule compliance for transient non-community public water systems. This notebook is for owners and operators of transient non-community systems providing drinking water from groundwater or purchased treated water sources. It is not intended for systems that treat surface water or groundwater under the direct influence of surface water. First, I'll go over some helpful resources, such as our Small Business and Local Government section, the Financial, Managerial, and Technical program, and our Environmental program. We'll then get into the Compliance Notebook and the handouts. During my presentation, I'll be doing a short demonstration on how you can find a licensed water operator. And during Haley's presentation, she'll focus on how you can navigate through Drinking Water Watch. There'll be a 10-minute break in between our presentations and then a Q&A session at the end. So as I mentioned, we are with the Small Business and Local Government Assistance section. We provide free technical assistance without the threat of enforcement. We also have local compliance specialists in your area. You can find that information on GI 002, which is the screenshot I provided on the slide. I also provided you with the link in my PowerPoint, but you can always call our hotline number, which is 1-800-447-2827. There's always a compliance specialist on hotline to assist you Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. You can also email us at texasenvirohelp@tceq.texas.gov. And like Alex mentioned, if you have system-specific questions during this webinar, please feel free to email us at pwshelp@tceq.texas.gov. So as I mentioned, we also have our Financial, Managerial, and Technical Assistance program, and we just for short call it FMT. FMT provides free technical assistance through a contract with the Texas Rural Water Association. You can make an FMT request yourself on our website, which I provided you the link on the slide, or you can contact a compliance specialist and we can make that request for you. So you'll see here on the left, I have the assignment task list, but that's something you should have also been provided. These are the many different things that FMT can assist you with, but keep in mind this is not an all-inclusive list. So say, for example, you have aging infrastructure. If you look under financial, you can see that FMT can assist you with funding resources. And then under managerial, you can see they can assist you with record keeping and emergency planning. And then under technical, a couple examples are they can assist you with compliance violations and MCL, which are those maximum contaminant level violations. Just recently, I had a system that contacted us that had an MCL violation for arsenic, and I made that FMT request that day. So a contractor is going to get with that facility and help them troubleshoot. So not only does FMT provide on-site assistance, but they also have these training workshops called Directed Assistance Modules. So if you look to the right of the screen, you'll see it says, which FMT training workshops are available? Now, a lot of these apply to surface water plants, but there are a few that may apply to you. So if you look at Dam 5, if you're treating with chloramines, you'll see that there's a workshop on process control for systems using chloramines. And then if you look down below at Dam 11, it's how to perform a revised total coliform rule level 1 assessment. Dam 12 is how to develop and manage an effective cross-connection control program. So these are some of the resources available to you. And currently, FMT is still doing on-site assistance, but the contractor and the facility both have to be comfortable with that. So if that's not the case, then they can either do like a video conference with you or a telephonic conference. We also have our Environmentor program, who assists small businesses, local governments, and independent school districts with environmental regulations and technical questions. Environmentors are qualified professionals with technical and legal expertise on environmental issues who volunteer their time to help our customers. Examples include consultants, water operators, engineers, and attorneys. A compliance specialist can help you determine if you qualify for this program and see if we can find you a match. So we also have online resources for public water systems. This slide shows you our compliance resources for transient non-community systems. And I just did a screenshot, so this list is actually much longer on our website. But you can see how you can find out more information about how do I prepare for an investigation, or what are my operational requirements. So again, these are some resources we have available to you. Before I get into the notebook, I just want to show you this short video on our Environmentor program. Ooh, what's it doing? Please remember this program is free and you can contact a compliance specialist for more information. Also, just a note, this video is from 2017, so there may have been some administrative changes.
You know, at TCEQ, we regulate literally hundreds of thousands of entities across the state.
One of the challenges that small businesses, small local governments, and independent school districts face is they don't have the bandwidth or the expertise to understand what can sometimes be complex environmental regulations.
Businesses generally want to comply with environmental regulations. Oftentimes, the fly in the ointment, if you will, is understanding the complexities. And so we try to make sure that we're working with those individuals that want to comply, but find the complexity very daunting.
That's why our Environmentors program is so important, because it matches qualified professionals with community members that are really in need.
We have about 265 Environmentors across the state. They're made up of attorneys, licensed operators, engineers, folks who are really professionals at dealing and working within the state regulatory framework that we have.
Let's go through this fleet management checklist, okay?
It's a complete volunteer-run program that we oversee, but it allows us to focus our resources on places where we really need it, and forms a great bond between the regulated entities and the agency.
It's all about the giving back. It's all about guiding these people who want to do the right thing.
If we wouldn't have had access to the Environmentor program, I would have been completely lost in how to get our landfill back up to the current standards that TCEQ requires.
The Environmentor, in our case, came in and made sense of where our violations were, gave us a point-by-point corrective action plan of how to move forward, and also served to communicate with TCEQ on our behalf.
By those volunteers coming forward, they're helping those businesses really get online, comply with the laws, driving the economy forward, but also helping protect public health and the environment.
Let's be sure we get this swept up. You can see this is an unauthorized discharge from the job site.
Environmentors across the state, thank you so much for what you do, not only for TCEQ, but you're also helping these people across the state to be good neighbors. You're helping them to comply, and you're helping us and them take care of Texas. So thank you.
Go. All right. Now we're going to get into the notebook. So just so that we're on the same page, I'd like for you to open your compliance notebook to page 3, which is the table of contents. So my presentation is going to cover the introduction, which starts on page 5, and it will go through records that need to be updated every 3 years, which is around page 39. When we come back from the break, Haley will begin her presentation with chemical analysis results, which starts on page 43, and then she'll go through the end of the notebook, which ends with complaints. So where can you find more information about your public water system? Let's go to page 5 in the compliance notebook. And you'll hear me turning pages, but that's because I'm going through this notebook with you. We hope that you use this notebook to keep your records and stay compliant with your record keeping. All right, so you can request records from the central records section. You can also search for specific TCEQ required forms by using keywords or form numbers. And also, if you want to know more information about your water system, such as sampling schedules and violations, you can go to Texas Drinking Water Watch. As I mentioned earlier, Haley will be going over how to navigate Drinking Water Watch during her presentation. We also have our guidance documents, RG 496, which is your public water system, now what? And RG 501, which is managing small public water systems. You can also find out more information about your system on Central Registry. And so I provided you a link there, and I just want to quickly go over the general information that you can find on Central Registry. Because actually when you call in, this is the first place I go to get a general idea of what's going on in the system. This is actually a great place to go if you're deciding to buy a system. You know, you can see what's going on. So if you go to the link that I provided in my PowerPoint, it's going to bring you here. And so you'll go to Regulated Entity Search. Let me get right here. And then you'll see, so option 1 is to provide an RN number. Now, let's say, you know, I'm a regulated entity and I don't remember my RN number. And I also don't remember my PWS ID, which is what you can put here in a program ID. But I do know the name of my system. So I can go here, regulated entity, under option 2. So I put in the name, and then I go down to the bottom, and I press search. So you'll see now I have some more general information. Now I have my RN number, okay? And so when I call TCEQ, that's always good to have. Then I can scroll down, and I can see here under CN number, that's my customer number. And then I scroll down even more, and then this is where I want to be, permits, registrations, or other authorizations. Now that's where I can find my PWS ID number, and you can see here I can actually click on it And this is going to provide me even more information about my system. All right, so now I've got some general information here, but what's actually really important is right here, related information. That's where I can find out about investigations that my system has had. There'll be notices of violations, potential enforcement actions, commissioner's actions. You know, it'll all be listed here and where I can click on it. You'll see here it just has investigations and Drinking Water Watch. We won't go into Drinking Water Watch because, as I said, Haley's going to go over that. But let me just click on investigations so you can see the additional information you can find out about the system. And so now I look under investigations and you can see, okay, I had a compliance investigation on October 17th, 29. So again, this is just the general information you can find out about your system. All right, if you go to page 7, you'll see that we have provided you with a quick reference to the rule citations and the Texas Administrative Code that specifically apply to public water systems. These rules have been sorted by the applicable areas of regulation, but some of the more commonly used rules are in subchapter D and subchapter F. And so I've provided you links to those subchapters on the slide. You can see subchapter D, you can find rules on water treatment, storage, distribution, minimum capacity requirements, and minimum acceptable operating practices. Under subchapter F, you can find the rules on microbial contaminants, disinfectant residuals, monitoring plans, and public notification requirements. Okay, and then if you'll go to page 8, you'll see where we've listed some important definitions. So how is a public water system defined? Meaning, you know, why do all these rules apply to me? Well, that means you're providing water for human consumption to at least 15 service connections or serve at least 25 individuals at least 60 days out of the year. And so what is meant by human consumption? Well, that's uses by humans in which water can be ingested or absorbed by the human body. Some examples are drinking, cooking, brushing your teeth, bathing, washing your hands, washing dishes, and preparing foods. All right, let's go to the system information section, which is on page 9. Data on public water system ownership and management needs to be maintained and updated. So we've provided you a form to put this information on. If you go to page 11, you'll see the form. If you look at the top, you'll see that you can put your facility name and your PWS ID. You can also put the responsible official information, emergency contact, the accredited laboratory you send your bacteriological samples to. And if you have a backflow prevention assembly in your system, this is where you'll put the tester information, because you do have to have a specific license to test those things. So you can't do it yourself unless you're licensed. And then just general information about your system, such as system capacities, number of connections, and population. So if your system serves 750 people or 250 connections or more, you must monitor the volume of water treated, chemical usage, and disinfectant residual on a daily basis. We've provided you with a water use log and a chemical use log where you can maintain those records. So if you go to page 15 and 17 of the notebook, you'll see those forms. And you'll see they're formatted similarly, right? So in the right-hand corner, you can put your facility name, your PWS ID, and the year and month that you're monitoring. Down below on the water use log, that's where you'll document the date, the meter reading, and water used in gallons. And then if you look at the chemical use log down below, that's where you'll document the date, name of chemical, and the amount of chemical used. You'll want to maintain these records at least 2 years, or keep the records, excuse me, for at least 2 years. So on this slide, I actually included a couple of photos from past compliance investigations. You can see in the top picture, this facility ran out of chlorine. And then in the bottom picture, the facility had a broken chlorinator. So if you're monitoring like you should, you'll be able to see when you're running low on chlorine, if you're having equipment issues or there's a leak. These are the things you want to address during your daily and weekly monitoring so it doesn't become a potential violation during during an investigation. So weekly records, if your system serves fewer than 750 people or 250 connections, you must monitor the volume of water treated, chemical usage, and disinfectant residual once every 7 days. Again, we provided you with a water use log on page 21 and a chemical use log on page 23. But we've also provided you with a disinfectant residual worksheet, and so I'm going to go to that. This is for systems that serve fewer than 750 people, or customers. And so you're not going to want to turn this sheet in. This is just for your record keeping, because you can see that you can document your weekly disinfectant residual and your monthly coliform sample. And so this is what you can use when you have to fill out that DLQOR, once a quarter, and I'll be going over that. And just as a reminder, the minimum disinfectant residual, if you're treating with free chlorine, is 0.2 milligrams per liter. And if you're treating with chloramines, is 0.5 milligrams per liter. But if you're a water hauler, those minimums are actually a little higher. The minimum disinfectant residual, if you're treating with free chlorine, is 0.5 milligrams per liter. And then if you're treating with chloramines, it's 1.0 milligrams per liter. All right, so now I'm on page 25 of the compliance notebook. In regards to coliform sampling, the number of samples you need to collect is based on the maximum population served by your facility. If you take a look at the table on my slide, you'll see that facilities serving a population of 1 to 1,000 will need to take a minimum of 1 sample per month. You'll need to submit the sample to a NELAB accredited lab who'll provide you with the microbial reporting form and sample bottles. We provided you with the link to the list of approved labs on page 25, and you also have a placeholder in the notebook to keep your lab results. All right, now I'm going to go over one of your handouts that's titled Guidance for Bacteriological Sample Collection Standard Operating Procedures. So these are some guidelines on how you want to collect your bacteriological sample. You'll see, if we start with sample site, make sure it is not low to the ground. Make sure the faucet has a downward facing outlet, at least 18 inches above the floor or ground. That's just to make sure that, when you put that spigot on, there's not going to have any debris that shoots up and potentially contaminates your sample. And so bottles, you can get sterile bottles provided by your lab. Those bottles are going to have a dechlorinating tablet in it. So don't take that out. And also don't use a bottle that does not have that tablet in there. If you end up with a chlorine residual on one of your samples, that's probably going to be rejected. So just some tips, before you collect your sample, wash your hands, wear gloves, and decontaminate the sample site by a torch or bleach solution. If you're using that bleach solution, make sure you get inside and outside of that spigot. And then you'll want to flush for several minutes. You can measure the disinfectant residual after. And then after that, slow the flow before you collect your sample, because you don't want to overfill that bottle. You're only supposed to fill it just above the 100 milliliter line. And so if you go over, that sample could actually be rejected. And just some more tips. Don't sample on a windy or rainy day. Like I said, don't overfill that bottle and don't put the lid on the ground. Again, that can cause contamination. So after you collect your sample, make sure you fill out the microbial reporting form and verify your sample hold times with the lab. When I was an investigator, when we took that sample or collected that sample, we went to the lab that day. But again, check with your lab. See when you have to submit it to them. You don't want it to hang out too long that it degrades and then it's rejected. And if you go to the last page of this guidance, we've given you some steps on if you get a positive result. And so you will have to do repeat samples. You'll have to do 3 of them. You'll do your first one at the original sample site. Your second sample will be upstream within 5 connections. And your third sample will be downstream within 5 connections. Hopefully those will all come back negative. If you end up continually getting positives and you trigger a level 1 assessment, don't worry. We have FMT who can assist you. And don't forget they have that training workshop, DAM 11, which is how to perform a level 1 assessment. And then you can always contact us, compliance specialists, on our hotline number. So if you have dead-end mains in your distribution system, and you may not, but if you do, you'll need to flush them on a monthly basis. This keeps the water moving around so it doesn't get stagnant, because stagnation in drinking water is not good. That's when you can get a reduction in your disinfectant residual and potentially have an increase in bacterial growth. So the rules do not require you to take a chlorine residual at the start of flushing or at the end, but it may be a good idea so it ensures you're getting fresh water flowing through the pipes. And if you go to page 29, you'll see that we've provided you with a flushing log. Again, we have a similar format. In the right-hand corner, you can put your facility name and your PWS ID, plus the year that you're monitoring. Down below, you can put the location that you're flushing. You'll put the date, the total time you flushed, and then the volume flushed in gallons. Quarterly records. So now I'm on page 31 of the compliance notebook. Disinfectant residual analyzers need to be verified to ensure they're reading correctly within the manufacturer's allowable range specifications. We've provided you with 2 forms for you to keep records of this. The first form is on page 33, and that's where you'll document your equipment. You can see down below, you can put the manufacturer, the model, and the serial number. And then if you go to page 35, you can see that's where you can document your 90-day calibrations. All right, another record you need to maintain on a quarterly basis is the disinfectant level quarterly operating report. I know that's a mouthful, and that's why we call it DLQOR. So you must monitor the level of disinfectant in your distribution system and report it on this form for each quarter. You don't need to submit the report to TCEQ as a transient non-community system, but you do need to maintain these records. So if an investigator comes on site, they're going to want to see these records. Now, if you're a surface water transient non-community system, you don't need to do a DLQOR, but you will need to do a surface water monthly operating report, but we won't be covering that in this presentation. And I'm actually going to go over really quickly how to fill out the DLQOR. I know it's a little blurry on my screen, so I'm going to go actually to the form that's on our website, and that link is in your notebook. All right, so when you go to the link that's in the notebook, it's going to pull this form up, which is on our webpage. You have 2 options. I'm going to just expand this a little bit more. There we go. You have 2 options. You can either press this button that says fill and sign in Acrobat in the right-hand corner, or you can download the form. I highly recommend you download the form. That way you have it in your records. but today I'm just going to press fill and sign in Acrobat. So it's going to take a moment to pull up. And when it pulls it up, then you'll be able to actually fill out the form. Let me just make sure here. Ooh. PDF should come up. Okay. There it is. Okay, sorry guys. All right, so here's the form that's gonna pull up for you. And you'll see the red rectangles, and that's where you're gonna fill information out. So you'll see on select quarter, we're gonna pretend that it's the third quarter. And so that's July, August, September. So I just select the quarter I'm in. And then I select the year, which is 2020. And just for this scenario, I'm going to be Happy Trails RV Park. And I'm just going to make up a PWS number, but this is where you will put that information. And then you'll see here it says type of disinfectant used in distribution system. So if you're using free chlorine, you'll select free chlorine. If you're using chloramines or both, that's what you'll select. So in my hypothetical, I'm treating with free chlorine, so I'm going to select that. I'm going to scroll down. And then you can see it's broken into first month of quarter, second month of quarter, third month of quarter. But you'll see this question here. Was the PWS active this month? Well, if you're actually a seasonal system, you may have to, select no or yes. You'll see it defaults to yes. So in my hypothetical, I'm not a seasonal system and I've been active this entire time, so I'll just keep it as yes. And so what I'll do is I'll use that worksheet that was provided in my notebook to now fill out this form. And so you'll see it's the month of July, and then I'll put the average of my disinfectant residuals. So in my hypothetical, it was 1.3. Number of residuals, well, I'm a small system, so I'm collecting once every 7 days. July, I think, is a 5-week month, so I'm going to put 5. Number below minimum, well, my minimum, because I'm treating with free chlorine, is 0.2. And all of mine have been, 0.2 or above. So I'm going to put 0 there. And then number with no residual, well, I had residuals on all my readings, so that's 0. But then I just want to show you here. So say August, I had a leak and I didn't realize it. So my average residual was 0.3. Number of residuals collected, I think this is a 4-week month. So I'm put 4. And then number below minimum. Well, I did have that leak, so I did have 1 that was below the minimum. And now you'll see it calculates this percentage for you. So that's not something I have to calculate. Number with no residual, I was still good. I still had a residual, so I'm going to put 0. And then real quickly for September, I'm going to fill this out so I can show you what it automatically does during the quarterly summary. So I had an average of 0.9. I believe that's a 5-week month, so I'm going to put 5. Number below the minimum, 0. Number with no residual, 0. And now you see under the quarterly summary and certification, it's already averaged out my disinfectant residuals for the quarter. Now I get it, it's really just adding up 3 numbers and dividing by 3, but that's just one less step I have to do. Lowest residual for the quarter, well, I did have that leak, so 0.1, and then highest residual, you just put whatever it is. But down below, you'll then enter your name and whether you're owner, operator, and you can fill in this information. But what I want to show you is step 1, I would print the copy. You can print this copy and then you can put it in your compliance notebook. And that way you have it. And then you can just clear the form. All right. And then next quarter, you pull up this form, you fill it out, print it out, and put it in your compliance notebook. annual records. Now we're going to get into tank inspections, and I'm on page 37. So each system's ground, elevated, and pressure tanks must be inspected annually by water system personnel or a contracted inspection service. Anyone can complete the required tank inspections. However, if something seems unsafe or is deemed a confined space of entry, you are required to hire a professional with the correct equipment for confined space entry. And then just specifically for pressure tanks that are over 1,000 gallons, which are required to have an inspection port, you do need to inspect the interior surface every 5 years. And so if you go to page 39 of the compliance notebook, you'll see that we provided you a tank inspection log. And so on here, you'll see that you can note the exterior of the tank and the interior of the tank. Also, if you decide to hire an operator, or you're required to have an operator because you're a surface water transient non-community system, you will need to submit an operator notice form to the Water Supply Division on an annual basis. This form is one of your handouts, but we also provided you a link to the form on page 37. Records kept every 3 years, that's page 41 of the compliance notebook. Well meter calibrations are required every 3 years, or you can replace the equipment. They can be mailed off for testing, or some companies will actually come to your facility because they'll, have the equipment to test the meter. So we provided you a placeholder to keep those records. All right, that ends the part of the actual notebook I'm going to be going over. Now I'm going to show you how to find a licensed water operator. The rules do not require you to have one, but I do think this is useful information. Some people actually have water operators that leave and then they don't know where to find a new one. So if you go to the link that I've provided on the slide, it's going to take you to our website, which is right here. All right, so this is on our website, and it says how to find a licensed water operator. You'll then go to a web search. So click on here. And then under all license types, I'm going to go to group search criteria. All right, once it pulls up, I'm now going to go to type and level. And I'm going to scroll down till I see water operations company. Now you can specifically search for a specific license. So an A water operator or a D licensed water operator, but you won't know if they're actually available to help you with your system. They may be employed elsewhere. So that's why I go to water operations company. And in this scenario, I'm just going to say I'm in Fort Bend. So I'm going to search for Fort Bend. Now I'm in Fort Bend County. Now I go to the bottom and I press search. You'll see I have about 5 options here, and it gives you the name, address, city, state, and zip code. So my system's in Rosenberg, so I'm going to check out this system that's in Rosenberg, or this company that's in Rosenberg. And you'll see that it provides you with the contact information. So you can contact them to see if they can assist you with your system. But what's also important is you want to double check that their licenses or registrations are current. And so they have a water operations company registration that expires February 28, 2021. So they're current and they're good to go. I just want to show you this one other thing since I'm here. All right. So I'm going to go under type and level. And for those who have backflow prevention assemblies, you will have to have a person specifically licensed to test those assemblies. And so that's why I just want to briefly show you this. So I can select backflow prevention assembly tester. Again, I'll just keep it with Fort Bend County. and I'll press search. And now you see I have all these people, this huge list of those who are licensed to test the backflow prevention assemblies. So I'm just going to press on one so you can see. Again, you will have a contact information, so you'll be able to contact them. And then, importantly, under licenses, make sure their license is current. And you'll see this person has a backflow prevention assembly tester license. It expires January 25th, 2022, and they're current. All right.
So we are going to go ahead and get started and jump back on in at the Drinking Water Watch activity. So for the purposes of this activity, I'm going to use this example system that you see on the screen here. It's a TxDOT facility that's a safe rest area, and I've gone ahead and included their PWS ID here as well as the name. And I'm actually going to take you over to the web page so I can show you some things on there. All right, so this is going to be the Drinking Water Watch homepage, and we can scroll down and you'll see a couple of boxes here for information. Now you don't have to fill in every one of these. Truly, you just need to input either the actual PWS ID number, which I've put in here, but let's just say that you don't remember it or you don't have it off the top of your head. We can also search by the second option here, which is going to be the water system name. And as long as we capture some bit of that name, the TxDOT Kennedy County, we don't have the safe rest area or the SRA included, but we've got some portion of their name here. And then we can either press enter on our keyboard or click down here where it says search for water systems. And this should pull up the system that we're looking for. Depending on what we typed in, there might be a couple of options, but given the information on this screen, you should be able to filter out which one you're looking for. So this is our return search for that TxDOT Kennedy County. So on the left-hand side, we can see the TX and then there's some digits afterwards. That's going to be their PWS ID number. And you see how my mouse went to a hand? This is a clickable link. So we know that we can click there. Then we've got the name of the facility here, the TxDOT Kennedy County Safe Rest Area. And then the next option here is called a fact sheet. And then we have a summary sheet right here. And these are both clickable as well. So we know we can click there for more information. This next column here is going to say type. And we're going to see an NC. This is a transient non-community. And so those are abbreviated as TNC. But in Drinking Water Watch, they'll be listed as an NC. Now the next column is going to list the status. And we're going to see an A for active here. Then the second to last column is going to be the primary county that's served, and we can confirm our location this way to make sure we're getting, there are some water systems that have the same name. There's a lot in Texas, and so verifying that we're looking in the right county, we know that this is the right system. And the last column here is going to be the primary source of the water type, and we're going to see a GW. That's for groundwater. Sometimes there's a surface water, sometimes there's a surface water purchase. It just depends on what all is being done, but generally this is what we're going to see when we click here. So the first portion that I want to take you through is actually going to be the middle of the page, that summary sheet option. So you just go ahead and click directly on summary sheet, and it should take us to the next page. And we can scroll down a little bit here. We can confirm that, yes, this is the TxDOT Kennedy County Safe Rest Area. We can see their RN number over here and their CN number. And those are the numbers that Heather mentioned when she was looking for the system in Central Registry. We can also confirm their PWS ID number once again right over here. And we can scroll down to this set of boxes here. It's called the All Water System Contacts. Now, this is important. When you look at this for your system, or if you're looking at other systems, this is how the public gets a hold of you, because this is available to the public. This is how TCEQ will get a hold of you, how the investigators will get a hold of you, and it's how we got a hold of you to invite you to this webinar. So it's definitely important that you keep this information here up to date and current. So if you have somebody who changes jobs, or maybe they're not the engineer anymore, you change your contract manager, or even if it's a simple phone number change, you want to make sure that you're updating all of that information from the phone to the mailing address to the actual contact themselves, because we do keep this on file, and like I said, it is available to the public, so you can see that it'd be very important to keep this available. We can scroll down a little bit, and we're going to confirm the number of connections right here and the population served. And so for a system like this, there are like a rest area on the side of the highway. It's hard to gauge how many people they get. Those numbers fluctuate. Sometimes you're going to see an even number like this, the 101 connection. They probably are doing a guess here because they have a hard time guessing how many people come in and out each day, and that number fluctuates daily. And then the number of connections would be the actual connections that they have there. And so that one is required to be represented accurately as well. Okay, then we're going to scroll down a little bit further. We're going to confirm here under the activity status. We saw on our other search page, the one right before this, that they had an A, but we can just confirm here that they are active. They do have the A for active right here. Under inactivation date, there's nothing listed here. Now, we have had some systems that because of COVID, they have gone inactive because their businesses have either temporarily closed, they're thinking about if they need to reopen or if they're going to stay closed. And so that's why this information is really important, that you get this to our agency and to our water supply division, so that then these things can be updated online here, so that systems, that whenever people from the public go to look, they know the activity status of the system. Let's see. And then we're going to scroll down the next set of boxes here. You'll see there's going to be a bit of information here about the most recent investigation. So you'll see that these are called sanitary surveys in Drinking Water Watch. This is the same thing as a comprehensive compliance investigation, or a CCI. And we're going to go over that a little bit more later in the presentation. But this is helpful to look at the last survey date here. We know that transient non-community systems are supposed to have an investigation every 5 years. So if we look here and see that our last investigation was 5 years ago or 4 years ago, we know that we're coming up and we need to be prepared for an investigation soon. And it really helps with you getting all of your records together to be prepared for that investigation. And then down here, we're going to see a treatments box. And under treatment here, you'll see what type of disinfection is being used. And this is going to be listed here as hypochlorination, which is sodium hypochlorite or bleach. And we'll go over that a little bit more when we talk about the disinfection portion. But I just want to point out to you that a simple transient non-community system that's using bleach is likely going to have these other treatment sequences and the disinfection zones listed as null, because they don't have multiple disinfection zones and multiple treatments that they're applying to the system. We can also see the well ID here and see a little bit of information about the total depth of the well, what it was rated at for the gallons per minute. We can see the water table that it's in, and we can actually go ahead and see the GPS locations here. I do want to tell you that some of the drill dates are going to say, you'll see some of them that are going to have the same name, the same numbers that are there, the early 1900s, and that's just one that we have to put in to guess if there's not an accurate drill log for that well. All right, we're going to go back to our search page where we returned here. We were just on that summary sheet in the middle of the page, but this time we're going to go ahead and actually click on that water system ID number on the left-hand side, the TX1310005. You just click directly on there. And now we're going to have a lot of information on this page, and you'll see that some of these things are clickable, some of them are not. There's a lot of boxes, there's a lot of information here. Now, we don't have time to go over all of Drinking Water Watch, but what we're going to do is highlight the main ones that we use and that we think that you'll use and that members of the public will use, so that you're familiar with those and how to navigate those portions of Drinking Water Watch. The first one we're going to start with is the water system facilities. In the first column, it's the first one here on the left-hand side. So you just go ahead and click directly on water system facilities. And we scroll down and we see that some new information was populated down here. We can see the actual information for this site. So here we've got the groundwater well. We can see that it's a groundwater well. Here's their PWS ID number. It's their first one. And sometimes that numbering can be different, but you can see over here that you can actually click directly on Google Maps to find it in the viewer. And we can also see the entry point here, the EP001, and their distribution system. Any other equipment that they have would also be listed on this page here as well. Now we're going to go ahead and go back up to the top in that first box with a lot of the clicks here. In the first column, we're going to click the third option, which was sample points. And you just go ahead and click again directly on sample points. And we scroll down, and again, new information has populated down here. So we can see that these are their sampling points for the water system, and some of these may look the same under the facility ID, so DS01, DS01, but what we can see over here under the location column is that this is actually a repeat TCR, or total coliform rule, sample result. This is actually the routine sample location, and this is actually the special sample location. We can see their entry point here at the office is their first connection, and then they've got some sampling from the well as well. All right, now we're going to go back up to the top again, and this time we're going to click on the fourth option again in the first column on the left-hand side, sample schedules -FANLS -plans, and you just go ahead and click directly on sample schedules. Now, there are two ways that you can view the sample schedules. The first one is this general view, the one that it'll automatically go to. You'll see that there's some information here. You may not know what these things mean. What is a SEC1 secondary revised? I don't really know what all of these things mean. And so you can click on them here to find out more of what that sample analyte group is. But I want to show you back up near the top of the page here. On the left-hand side, there's an option to view the expanded sample schedules. And if you click this option and scroll down, you should actually be able to see the routine TCR sample schedules. And we can see here on the begin and end date, there should be an option for whichever one has the continuous one listed for the end date. That means that that's the one that they're being held responsible for currently. And we can see that there's no seasonal period for that. That's year round. They have to pull that sample. And here we can see the last column is what the requirement is. And they're required to pull one routine TCR sample every month. And now going back down to where I showed you those secondary revised, here we can see a little bit more about what they're required to sample and what they're not required to sample. Again, we can see that that end date is listed as continuous, so this is something that they're still responsible for sampling. And under that REX column again, we see one RT-3Y. That means one routine sample every 3 years. And we can see that there's a current monitoring period here for their 3-year period as well. And it'll do this for the other samples that are required as well. And if you try this expanded option and you end up not liking this, you can just click back where we clicked to expand the sample schedule here to do return to simple schedule. And that'll take you back to that first view that we saw. Okay, we're going to go back up to the top. And again, in our first column here, it's the fifth one down. There's going to be two listed in this box here, site visits and milestones, but those are two different pages. So for this one, you just click directly on site visits. And you scroll down, and any site visits that are going to be listed here are not going to be the CCI or the sanitary survey or the comprehensive compliance investigation. They're not going to be any complaint investigation site visits. These are going to be anything that happened as a result of a level 1 or a level 2 assessment. And in the presentation, we're going to talk a little bit more about those level 1 and level 2 assessments if you're not sure what those are, but that's where these would be listed here. And if you trigger one, there's a pretty quick response time for doing the assessment, which is why it's important to see if those are in here. All right, now we're going to go into the second column here, but the first box, and again, we have two clickable options. The first one that I want to show you is going to be the violations one. So you just go ahead and click directly on violations, and it's going to take us to the next page. And here we'll be able to see any violations that the system could have had. And we can see that they're going all the way back to 2003. So there's a lot of information on this page, and some of these things, the violation type code, that probably doesn't mean anything to you, and it doesn't necessarily need to. What you want to focus on is the violation name so that you might know what the violation was. And then what's really important is this last column over here that says, has the violation been resolved, returned to compliance? And that's what our team, our enforcement division, will call RTC, for return to compliance. And you would want to go and check and make sure that each of your violations has a yes. These all have been returned to compliance. Sometimes they might not be updated on this side of things where it says, is it on the path to compliance? Has it been addressed? And that just could be that our system needs to update that. It could also be that the violation was resolved before it was sent on a path to compliance. So maybe a system went to enforcement, but they rectified the problem before enforcement was able to draw up the papers. So we can look here in that last column for this one and verify that, yes, this violation has been returned to compliance. And that's the key thing to focus on here. All right. And also these violations that are listed here, you'll notice that these are a lot of like monitoring violations and public notice violations. These are going to come from our water supply division in our Austin office, and these are not going to include the violations that would be determined at a comprehensive compliance investigation or a complaint investigation. Those would be things like missing paperwork, faulty equipment or leaking equipment, things like that. You won't see listed here. Those you get issued through the regional office, and you get a report and a letter with those types of violations as well. So just to know that this list is not all inclusive for a system. All right, we're going to go back up to the top here, and now we're going to go to this third column here, and we're going to click the first box, which is TCR sample results. And again, you just click directly on there. And we're going to scroll down, and this is going to be all of their total coliform results here. So all those samples that were required to be pulled, but this database is only going to store 2 years worth of sample results. So we can scroll down to the very bottom, and the last sample we have here is from just about 2 years ago. That's as much as this can hold in here. But what we're going to be looking at here when we're looking at these samples is this is a routine TCR sample. And what's really important is next to the coliform here and E. coli here, we want to see an A for absent and an A for absent as well. If there was a positive sample, the sample would be bolded red, and we would also see a P like this. And we can see that this was a positive for coliform, so we know that maybe something's going on. And then we can also confirm that the system pulled their required raw from the well, and then they pulled their repeats for the same location in the upstream and the downstream. So they're in compliance with the rule, but maybe they had a problem here. And if this ever happens to your system and you need help troubleshooting what's causing the positive, let us know. We can try to help you. Our environmentors that Heather talked about can help you, and our FMT can help you as well that Heather talked about. But just so that you can see here, this is how those will look. And if you have a large system with a lot of samples, you can also click the second option, which is the recent positive TCR results. And this is only going to show positive samples. So you see how that just decreased to only 2 samples versus multiples and all the pages of those. And again, we're going to see that these are in red as well, that these are positive samples. And it's on that note, it's a good thing too to keep record of, that looks like this happened for them in August. And so I would definitely recommend keeping some records of what was causing the positive and what they did to rectify the problem. Did they identify what the problem was and fix it? Because when an investigator comes out, they're going to ask you about those positive samples and ask you what you did to fix them or what was the problem, things like that. So just being as prepared as you can. All right, we're going to go back up to the top here. And this time we're going to do the same third column, but this is the fourth option down. It's listed as chemical results, and then there's sort by, and we can either click name or code. Now this is your preference, but I would recommend sorting by name. All the analytes are going to be alphabetized this way. When you look at them by code, they're put in numerical order, and I know that I don't know all of the analyte code numbers, and so that doesn't really help me. But whichever one you prefer, for the purposes of this, I'm going to show you the name option. And we're going to scroll down, and here you'll be able to see that all of these analytes are alphabetized, and then their codes are over here on the left-hand side. And you see how my mouse went to the hand again? These are all clickable, so we can click to see the aluminum results or any of these analytes. I am going to use nitrate as an example to show you. So I'm just going to scroll down. I found nitrate here, and the analyte code is 1040. So I just click directly on that analyte code. And I scroll down, and okay, yes, this is analyte name nitrate. So yes, I'm in the right one that I was looking for. And this has the option to store more data than the 2 years. So we'll see like these samples are going back to 2003. And there's, again, a lot of information on this page, and I would just tell you that the most important things to look at would be confirming that this is the sample that you want to look at, and then looking at the sample collection dates under this column, the sample collection date. And then over here on the right-hand side, these last three columns. So the furthest one is going to be the current maximum contaminant level allowed, or what we call the MCL for the maximum contaminant level. And for nitrate, that is 10 milligrams per liter. And so that's going to be the same for all of these. Now, when the lab analyzes your sample for nitrate, they're going to report two different ways. You'll see one down here that's listed under the concentration column, and that one was listed at 0.11 milligrams per liter. That's still in compliance, still below the 10 milligram per liter threshold, but it was a higher value than their others, which is why it was reported as a true concentration of nitrate in the sample. Now, the other column that I showed you, this reporting level, you're going to see a couple that they have here that the lab has been reporting under. There's some under 0.5 milligrams per liter. There's some under 0.1 and 0.4. This means that the lab analyzed the nitrate sample, and the level of nitrate in the sample was below this reporting level. So it doesn't mean that it was at 0.05 milligrams per liter, but it was lower than 0.05 milligrams per liter. And it's such a minute value, and we know for certain that it is below our 10 milligrams per liter, which is why it's reported that way. And so both of these are obviously going to be listed as incompliant. And again, if this sample was out of compliance and it was higher than our MCL allowed, then it would be bolded red like how we saw the other samples. All right, just want to show you guys one more thing on Drinking Water Watch. The fourth column over here on the right-hand side, we are going to click the second option, which is PBCU summaries. And when you click this, you can scroll down and see any required lead and copper samples for the system. And you can check the way that those are analyzed is a total percentage that are exceeding the action level. And so we can see that those numbers would be reported here as well. And if you guys have more questions about Drinking Water Watch, or you find yourself not sure what something means, there is this glossary here. And there are instructions here as well that can help you, but you can also let our team know and we can help you, or we can get some help for you with using that. All right, we are going to go back to our presentation. Okay, so we just went over this information in the Drinking Water Watch, and I just recommend for you guys to click through and really try clicking there for yourself and reading what some of those things are for your system to understand how best to use Drinking Water Watch. All right, and like Heather, I am going to be flipping pages in my notebook with you guys, so you might hear some paper flipping in the background. All right, let's start with the chemical analysis. Now, back in our notebook, this is on page 45. And you'll see that we've listed some examples there, and one of them is the nitrate that we went over in Drinking Water Watch, and I showed you how to find those, and I showed you how to understand and read those results as well. So we covered that, but I do want to let you know that the TCEQ does use a contractor to collect a lot of the chemical samples, and our main contractor is the Antea Group, and they are responsible for the Central Texas area, and for the rest of Texas, they do have subcontractors that they use. So in South and Southeast Texas, it's Third Coast Environmental who's usually coming to do these samples, and in North and Northeast Texas, it's Curo Environmental. In the Panhandle of Texas, it's Gerald Files. And in West Texas, they use Essico Environmental. Now, I do also want to point out to you that while they do the collection of this sample and they do submit it to the lab for you, you as the facility are still responsible for the laboratory analysis fees. So TCEQ takes care of that contract with those main contractors and subcontractors to do the sample collection. But again, the facility is responsible for the laboratory analysis fee. So you will get billed from the lab for that sample, and you are responsible for paying that. All right, we are now on page 49 in our notebook, and we're going to talk about public notices. And I do have an example here on the screen. You'll see one that was issued, the actual notice on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, you'll see our certificate of delivery, or the COD. So public notices are required for some boil water notices, for some monitoring violations, some reporting violations, and obviously for maximum contaminant level violations, so anything that exceeds that MCL. Now, with the public notice, there is the actual issuance of the public notice with the mandatory language that's required to be issued. And then there's what we call the certificate of delivery, or the COD. And that's the form that you'll see the screenshot of. It's a little blurry, but we do have that as well. And the certificate of delivery is going to be required with the public notice, and that does have to be sent back into TCEQ for review, and that certifies that you did issue the correct notice with all of the mandatory language, and it tells us what method you issued the notice, and you certify all of that under penalty of law on that form. Now, our public notice webpage on our TCEQ page has all of the public notices and the certificate of deliveries, each separated by their reason type and then the whatever requires that notice. And those are going to be dependent on the things that I mentioned earlier. So the monitoring violations, reporting violations, MCL violations, they all have different tiered numbers and violation code numbers. But you should be able to sort through those. There's a lot on our webpage, which is why I couldn't screenshot it for you. There's, I think, literally hundreds, but you can click through there and see. And then also know that TCEQ is going to let you know that you're out of compliance with those things, and they will be issuing you the paperwork and the required notices. All right, now this flowchart here is available in the Texas Administrative Code, so in subchapter 290, and this is actually point 47, and this is Appendix H, as in Harry. And this is really important. I just really recommend that you guys either keep this in your notebook or keep this inside of your well house at the plant, somewhere that you have access to, because this flowchart allows you to follow the various decision matrices here in a given situation to evaluate if you would need to issue a boil water notice or not, and if so, if you need to require the regional, if you need to notify the regional office, or if you need to issue the notice, or if additional samples are required, that kind of thing. And like I said, this is available in the 30 Texas Administrative Code 290, and we can also send you a copy as well if you need help finding it, but just something that I recommend. I don't ever want you to be in a situation where you need it and you can't find it. And you remember that I talked about it, but you don't have access to it and you guys are losing pressure. That way you have it and you're prepared. All right, we are on page 53 in our notebook, and we're going to talk about maintenance here. So any cleaning or repairs that have to be done or are routinely completed should be tracked in the log that we provided for you on page 55. You'll see there's just a couple of boxes there, and obviously if you do a lot more maintenance, you can modify this to fit your system. And if you need help with that, then we can help you as well. But this is just a really good way to keep track of all of the information that you're doing for the maintenance on the system and having that for review for the TCEQ whenever they come to do the investigations. So on page 55, you'll see that we've put the date as a column, whatever description of the cleaning that's being done. So like the picture with the 3 gentlemen that are cleaning there, the description would be that they're cleaning the inside of the tank. And under comments, we may make a note that says that we drained the entire tank and we cleaned for 6 hours, and then it was fully clean, and we did a washout, and then we refilled it, which took another 20 hours or something like that. That kind of information is what is going to be the most helpful to include there. And obviously, if you have any mainline breaks that require repairs, like the picture on the left-hand side. Okay, now we are on page 57 in our notebook, and we're going to talk about the distribution map. So I've listed some of the, not necessarily requirements, but examples of what to include in your distribution map up here on the screen for you. So the map itself is required to be both accurate and up to date, and it has to reflect the current system that's in place. So any changes that were made or modifications, those things all need to be updated in the distribution map. So it's best to include some of those examples that I put up on the screen, like any valves that you have, if they're shut-off valves or curb stops, all the mains for the water system, where those are, and then any emergency facilities that you have, like a fire hydrant or anything like that, in case of an emergency, so that someone could find those. And then the flushing locations as well, so at those dead-end mains, wherever you have a flush valve, or if you just open up a sample tap there and flush from there. And then if you have street names, like if it's an RV park or something like that, the street names can be really helpful because someone coming in doesn't know the locations there. And if you tell them it's over by so-and-so's house or something, you know, they can't always find it. So the street names are really helpful. And then also, if you have the information on the water line sizes or any purchase meter or service meters that you have for the system as well. And I do want to let you know that if you spend all this time to update your map, you can also use the same distribution map for your sample siting plan, and we'll go over that a little bit later, but the only thing that you would have to change to include there is just including those sample sites in your map. So you could just use some stars to annotate which ones would be your sample sites there. And I have a couple more examples for you. All right, now this one you'll see is a small city, so it's probably not going to be applicable to you guys, but I wanted to show it to you for a few reasons. You can see that they've put the water treatment plant location, but what I really want to highlight for you is this legend over here on the left-hand side. They've used a color coding system to mark which size main lines they are and feeder lines. And then they actually have sample stations, which is this large filled-in star. But the sample sites are that unfilled, slightly smaller star. And something like that can be really helpful because if we didn't have the legend, we might not know what we were looking at. But using that legend to try to help explain to a user that wouldn't use this distribution map frequently can be really beneficial. And I have one more. This is more of a treatment plant map. So the well house, the water treatment plant, whatever you want to call it. And you can see here that they've got listed the surface water intake. They also have the groundwater well with the type of pump, the submersible pump or a vertical turbine. But this is really helpful information for investigators. And then under treatment, they just have listed filtration and disinfection. And if I was working on this map, I would really want to include more information information about my disinfection and filtration if I had it. So what type of chemicals am I using? Really, the more descriptive that you can be, the easier it's going to be for anyone to understand. And then even that storage reservoir, you can see that there's that storage tank. I would really like to include what size is it, what material is it made of, things like that. That would just be helpful and beneficial to keep that information readily available for anyone. Okay, now we are on page 61 in our notebook, and we're going to talk about the plant operations manual. So again, like the distribution map, this has to be ready and available for review. And when it really comes in handy and is important is for emergency situations. So if there's some kind of emergency that's happening and the main water system operator or the person who's usually in charge of making sure the plant is okay is not able to get there, or they're not able to fix the problem. The idea of this plant operations manual is that another member of the facility would be able to follow the instructions in the plant operations manual and start up the system or fix the issue or follow along to figure out what needs to be done with those emergency protocols and that kind of thing. And another good idea of things to include in here as well is any manufacturing manuals that you get for equipment at your system. You could definitely include those in here as well, because questions will come up about what type of equipment it is and what its capacity is, things like that. And if you have those manuals, then that information should be provided there as well. Now, we do have a template for the plant operations manual, and that is available in our asset management guide. And I think somebody will be able to post that in the comments for you as well in case you want that. But if not, just let us know and we can get you a copy of that as well. Okay, now we're going to go to page 65 in our notebook, and we're going to talk about the monitoring plan. And this monitoring plan has to be up to date as well. And we are really looking for the monitoring plan to describe sampling frequencies, locations, general procedures, and then the laboratory analysis locations and contact information. And we do have an editable PDF template for the monitoring plan available on our website. If you go to the homepage and use the top right little search bar, it's like a Google search, you can type in there monitoring plan, it should come up. You can let us know, we can send you a copy of it. But this is important, and I think once your system gets this in an electronic version, you'll be able to make corrections much quicker anytime that you have any corrections that are required or anytime that anything changes. So like the contact information or things like that. And like I said, that is required to be updated as well. So any of those changes have to be marked in there. Still on page 65 in our notebook, but this part is going to talk about the sample siting plan. And this is essentially an extension of the monitoring plan, and it's required specifically for the coliform sampling. And it intends to identify routine and repeat sample locations for any coliform sampling. And the whole point of this is that we don't want you to get into a situation where you're required to take a repeat sample, but you haven't identified those upstream and downstream locations yet. You haven't identified any of that information. So this plan really helps you to identify those things ahead of time before you would have an issue, because there is a really quick turnaround required on those sample collections. It's 24 hours. And I mentioned to you before that you could use your distribution map and just add in the sample siting plan locations onto that map to include in your sample siting plan, because the map is going to be required. And so you could take one of those map examples that we went over and use, say, a different color star or a square or something, and include a small legend that would say what those sample sites are, identifying them by numbers or whatever your system uses would work. All right. Now, if your system is not using chloramines or blending chlorine and ammonia, then the nitrification action plan is not a requirement. But if the system is purchasing chloraminated water from a wholesaler, or if you are doing the physical combination of the chlorine and ammonia, then you are required to have what's called a nitrification action plan. Unfortunately, the NAP is not what we all think of as a NAP, but this is required for those systems. And it's important to note that if you're purchasing chloraminated water, like I mentioned, you are required to have a NAP. And we do have a guidance on how to develop these goals here in green, and then baseline triggers and actions as well. And those are going to be specific to your system. So if you do have to create a NAP, we do have workshops that help with creating the NAP, and we have tons of guidance on our website to help with that as well. But just know that your goals and triggers and actions, the green and the yellow that I showed you here, those should be site specific. So for example, an option here on an action is listed as flush dead ends. If your system doesn't have dead ends to flush, then that shouldn't be listed in your NAP, because that's not something that you can do to rectify the problem. And again, if you don't use chlorine and ammonia in your system, you're not blending, you're not purchasing chlorinated water, then you can recycle that page, which is 71 and 72 from your notebook. All right. Now we are on page 73 in our notebook, and this is going to go over the plans and specifications. So all public water systems are required to have approval for the system, and that can either be through getting plans and specifications prior to construction, or what we call as-built approval. And that is obviously as-built approval of the system that is already in existence, what's already created and drilled, and things that are already there. Now, I do want to let you know that this process does require a licensed engineer in the state of Texas to submit to our engineers in Austin who review that for approval. And something that I want to point out as well is that any significant changes that you make to the facility are going to require submittal and approval, again, with a licensed engineer in the state of Texas. So for an example, if you decide that you're going to install a brand new pressure tank and it's twice the size of your old one, you're going to need to get an engineer to submit plans and specifications for that new pressure tank and get approval for that prior to the installation. Now, always you can request an exception to these rule requirements, but I do want to let you know that those are considered on a case-by-case basis, and that is a timely process. So in general, the exceptions, they require about 100 days for review, and the plans and specifications, which have to be submitted after the exception requests, take about 60 days for review. And that's assuming that there's no back and forth, there's no additional information that our engineers need from your engineer to consider the project. Now, the last bullet point that you'll see here is the well completion data, and that should consist of the things that you'll see on page 73 in your notebook. Some of those examples are going to be the well driller's log, a sanitary control easement, a 36-hour pump test, things like that. And you'll see those again, like I said, on page 73 in your notebook. Now we are on page 81 in our notebook, and we're going to talk about the National Sanitation Foundation and what the requirement is for both chemicals and then the components that have to meet this standard for TCEQ requirements. So the ANSI that you see there on the screen, ANSI, that's the American National Sanitation, and the NSF is the National Sanitation Foundation. And the chemicals are required to meet the ANSI NSF standard 60, and the components or the equipment that you see there is required to meet the standard 61. And on page 81 in your notebook, you'll see that you can search at the National Sanitation Foundation or the NSF's website. We've provided links to search for those chemicals and equipment, again, on page 81 in your notebook. And for most of y'all that are participating in our webinar today, you're probably using a form of bleach or what we call sodium hypochlorite. And that would be listed there as hypochlorination, like what we saw when we looked at the TxDOT facility and Drinking Water Watch. And you can use that linked search in your notebook on page 81 to locate the approved brands of the disinfection chemicals like bleach or sodium hypochlorite, whichever one you want to call it. All right, page 85 in our notebook is the backflow prevention and assembly. Now, I know Heather mentioned to you guys how to find those testers. I wanted to give you some examples of some backflow that maybe you have at your house or that you've seen when you drive through a city or an area, things that you might be familiar with. And those pictures are on the screen for you. And while you're looking at those, I want to try to give you a little bit of understanding about what backflow is. And backflow can sometimes be called back siphon, and this will typically occur when you have a loss in pressure or pressure suction on one side of the line. If that's greater than the other side of the line, then typically it will pull back that way, whichever side is greater. So I have an example to give you that I hope will help explain kind of the concept of why we require this, because I don't like to tell people this is the rule requirement, that's it. I like to try to give an understanding of why it's important and really give you the real life so that hopefully you understand that a little bit better. So imagine a water hose that's filling up a horse trough, and the horse trough has an automatic level indicator that refills the trough, and it tells that water hose when it needs to fill up. Now, you guys know the Texas heat sitting in the summer, that water in there is probably gleaming with algae and maybe a little bit of horse slobber. Probably not something that you or I would like to drink, but it makes no difference to the horse. This device, like some of the ones that you've seen on the screen here, the whole purpose of it is to prevent that horse trough water with the algae, with the bacteria, with whatever else from entering back into either our distribution system through the plumbing or the other plumbing that goes directly back into our well, depending on what type of system we have. And the type of backflow prevention assembly testing equipment that's required is based on the type of health hazard that's present. And we do have a reference with a whole list of these, again, in our 30 Texas Administrative Code. It's in subchapter 290, again, point 47. And this one is going to be F, as in Frank. And so where I told you that list for the boil water notice was that decision matrix there, that's right before that as well in the back appendix there. And if you need help getting to that list, you can let us know, we'll help you out. All right, we are now on page 89 in our notebook, and we're going to talk about purchase water contracts. So these are required if you purchase water from another water system, or if you are the wholesaler, you're required to have a purchase water contract. And we recommend that these purchase water contracts include things like dates of use, any expiring dates of use, agreed upon rates for what the system is going to be purchasing at, any maximum amounts or minimum amounts that are for bill or usage, and then general terms of usage. So if there's some requirement or stipulation that the system has to use X amount or they're billed another set amount for that amount. And this is a legal binding document, and this is something that your investigators are going to be looking for. And so it's really important that you both have this purchase water contract and then that you're aware of whatever stipulations are in there as well. And there have been times that people have really outdated purchase water contracts, and at that point, it's something that you may want to address with either your purchaser or your wholesaler to discuss with them about revisiting the claims in that purchase water contract. All right, now we are going to talk about notices of violations and the corrective action, and that is going to be page 93 in your notebook. So these notices of violation could be given if you have any monitoring or reporting or public notice violations like what we saw with the Water Supply Division, and those would come out of Austin. But the specific ones that I want to talk to you about, since we already spent a while talking about those, is what would come out from a sanitary survey or a comprehensive compliance investigation or the CCI or a complaint investigation. This is when your regional investigator is going to come out to your system and check for compliance with the TCEQ requirements. And they're going to do that specifically at your facility, looking at your paperwork, looking at the equipment that's there on site. And after they finish their review, if you have a CCI done or a sanitary survey, whatever you want to call it, you'll get a letter in response to the investigation. And so they do have notices of violations, and they also have a general compliance letter. And that means that they didn't allege any violations at the time of the investigation, but always remember that a violation could develop at a later date in a moment's notice. If a sample is not pulled in time, if a sample comes back higher, just being aware of all of those things so that you're prepared in case any of those happen. And if you didn't get the general compliance letter and you did get a notice of violation, what's important is that you want to address their alleged violations that are listed for the system. And the second option is that the CA, the corrective action. So that's what you really, really want to work on documenting and what your response was to the alleged violation. So for example, if an investigator came out to my facility and I received an alleged violation for a failure to have a complete and updated monitoring plan available for review, then my corrective action to the investigator would be that I have created and maintained a new monitoring plan, and I also emailed that current monitoring plan that I just created to my investigator yesterday for their review. And I just maybe include the date that I gave that to the investigator. And so keeping records of that probably in this section of your notebook, page 93 and 94 and 95, putting it back behind there so that then any other investigators that come, it won't always be the same one. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's someone different, but then they can see what your response was to the violation, and then they know that the violation is no longer active. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the sanitary surveys or CCI or comprehensive compliance investigation. And this is page 97 in your notebook. And it has all these lovely names, but you'll probably hear the investigators refer to it as a CCI, and that's for comprehensive compliance investigation. The TCEQ and the state love acronyms, so you're going to get a lot of them if you haven't noticed that already. So this CCI or sanitary survey in Drinking Water Watch is going to be listed as the sanitary survey, but please just know that that's the same thing as the CCI, and that's what your investigators are going to call it. Now, I mentioned to you earlier that transient non-community systems, or TNCs, are required to have a CCI every 5 years, and that's the same requirement for another type of system that we have called a non-transient non-community system. And then community systems like municipalities, they're required to have an investigation every 3 years. And this is going to be that thorough review of all of your records and of this notebook, hopefully, once you have it filled out for your system. And it'll be a really thorough review of the physical equipment that's at the water treatment plant. So they will walk through and look at the equipment and ask you questions about things that they think could be fixed or need to be updated, or if they're just not sure what something is, they'll ask you all those things, and they're going to look at all of that. It will take a couple of hours usually. And due to COVID, they've changed some of the way that they've been doing these investigations. So anything that they can get from you virtually or online or in email in a zip file, something like that for them to start reviewing, they will do that because they're trying to minimize that human contact. So just be aware. If you don't have your records available online, you only have one hard copy in the office or something like that, just let them know, and they should work with you about that as well. Right, now we are on page 101 in our notebook, and this is the groundwater rule compliance records page. So if a system has not been approved for 4-log treatment of viruses and it receives a distribution positive coliform sample, they're required to collect raw water samples, which would be from the well. And that 4-log treatment that I mentioned in that definition for the treatment of viruses is the treatment of drinking water to at least 99.99% inactivation or total removal of viruses. And so that rule requires regular compliance monitoring to ensure that the treatment is reliable and removing the contaminants. And so essentially, we developed this rule and our TCR rule to try to help with the positive samples that are coming back for coliform and figuring out why their positives are happening and how can we prevent those in the future. And like I mentioned before, and I think Heather mentioned as well, if your system is struggling with positive coliform samples and you're not sure why, try using that SOP that Heather pointed out to you, and then let us know, and we can get you some assistance from FMT or our Environmentor to try to help you reduce those positive coliform samples that you're getting at your system. All right, now we are on page 105 in our notebook, and this is going to be the revised total coliform rule, or the RTCR. This is the most current version of the rule, and you'll hear people call it the new RTCR rule. It used to be the total coliform rule, and when it was revised, it was listed as the RTCR, the revised total coliform rule. And that was done in 2015. And so this is the current requirement, but if a system pulls a multiple total coliform positive sample or a combination of the E. coli or fecal with a total coliform, then they trigger what's called a level 1 or a level 2 assessment, and those may be required at that point. I mentioned these to you when I showed you the site visits portion of Drinking Water Watch. And the purpose of this assessment is to identify what we call a sanitary defect, or an SD, in the system that could be causing these repeat positives. It's not to wag our fingers at someone and tell them that they've done something wrong. The purpose of these level 1, level 2 assessments is to try to help figure out what's causing those problems, like I mentioned, and how do we prevent them from happening again. And the level 1 assessment is going to be conducted by the facility at the facility, and the level 2 assessment is going to be conducted at the facility, but with the assistance of TCEQ. So one of our staff will be out there to help you in identifying that sanitary defect. And there is a pretty quick time requirement turnaround for these to be completed and submitted back. So I just want you to be aware of that in case you trigger one. It's about 30 days that it has to be completed and sent back, and that would be from the trigger date. So just to be aware of those things as well. Right, we are on page 109 in our notebook. And we're going to talk for a minute about seasonal public water systems. If your system doesn't meet the definition of a seasonal water system and you know that you're not seasonal, then you can recycle this page and page 111 from your notebook, as it wouldn't be applicable to you. But seasonal water systems are going to really apply to places like summer camps. And I think that they're kind of the best example for this. So when you think about it, that summer camp is probably not open year round, but during the summer when they are open, they do meet the definition of a PWS. They've got at least 25 people out there, and they're open. The summer is more than 60 days. And so the rest of the year, that summer camp is probably shut down. They're not using the water. No one's out there really, unless it's like one maintenance guy or someone who lives out there. And they're required to, before they start serving again, they have to complete a startup procedure and certify that completion, which includes like some necessary sampling and then any repairs that would be required to be done. And we do have that checklist if you are a seasonal water system and you do need help with that. But like I said, if you're not a seasonal system, then you can just disregard this section. Okay, now this next section on page 113 in your notebook is the emergency preparedness plan, and this may not be applicable to you. So like I said before, if it's not applicable, you can just recycle this page and page 115 from your notebook. But the emergency preparedness plan is applicable to affected utilities that are located in Harris County and Fort Bend County. And the affected utility is defined by the population and the location, and it's based off of that House bill that I put there in the slide for you. And the emergency preparedness plan essentially outlines how a system will operate in a given emergency situation. And these do have to be submitted to our water supply division for review. But what I want to tell you guys is that it's not a bad idea to create something similar to an emergency preparedness plan for your system. Not at all a requirement, but just something that I want you to consider and be prepared for any kind of emergency situation that could happen and how your system would operate under duress. So if you guys are located in a coastal area, you know, especially given the timing right now, Texas is getting hit and really everyone is, but how your system plans to operate. Is it going to close down? Is one person going to stay? You know, those things just totally depend on your system. And so you guys may already have something kind of in place, but if you do, go ahead and include that in your notebook so that the investigators know how the system is going to operate in that situation. And if you don't have something already created, but you think that you would like to create something like that, let us know. We can help you out, and we would be happy to help you with that so that you are better prepared for emergency situations, especially in our coastal areas in Texas. All right, we are almost done, y'all. We're on page 117 in our notebook, and we're going to go over complaints. And I hope that you guys don't ever have any complaints for your system, but I'd rather you be prepared just in case you do. So it's really important to collect any and all complaints that are alleged against the system. In that record, you can see on page 119, we made a little template there for you with a table to collect those complaint allegations. But you obviously want to take down the nature of the complaint. So what are they alleging? Is there no water, or was there discoloration in the water? What color was it specifically? Did they say it smelled? What did it smell like specifically? And then obviously logging that location. Was it the whole system, or was it just that one customer's house, or just at the one building? And then the date and time of that as well. And what I want to highlight to you as probably the most important portion of this collection of data is the last column on page 119 in that table, the result of the investigation. So that's what your response was to the complaint. So if a customer said, hey, my water is black, and I'm in this RV for the weekend, you would want to go and check out, is their water really black? Is it happening across the plant? Everyone in the RV park is having that, or is it just that one? You know, whatever it was that you did to try to rectify that problem. And keeping down that information is going to be really important, because that's going to be available for the investigators to review as well. And if you didn't write down what your response was, then the assumption is that you didn't do anything. And that's definitely not the right thing to do. And that's not what's part of the requirement. So hopefully that you never have to use it. But if you do, then you'll already be prepared and have that as well. Okay, so I know that Heather and I have given you guys a lot of information today, and you may already be familiar with all of it, but some of y'all may be feeling a little bit overwhelmed or lost or confused about some things. So I just wanted to reiterate all of the things that Heather and I have already mentioned that offer assistance to you. So the first one is going to be the Small Business and Local Government Assistance section, which is us, and our hotline number, which is there on the line again. You can get help right away from someone from that line. And then using your local compliance specialist through that GI 002 that Heather mentioned, or calling hotline to figure out who's near you. And then the Environmentor program that we offer, which is outstanding, and Heather showed you guys that video as well, but another free option that's available to you as well. And then the FMT program, also another free item as well. And Heather mentioned that the task list is not all inclusive. They can really help with a lot. Those people have helped a lot of systems in Texas, so they have a lot of experience. And then something that I haven't mentioned yet is that TCEQ does hold drinking water advisory work groups and other type of stakeholder meetings. And they do really appreciate having your feedback as a system. And so participating in those options as well. And then obviously, I think our whole goal is that you guys will use and appreciate this notebook for your record keeping purposes. And at the end of the day, it'll make your life easier and make it easier for the investigator as well. And hopefully you find that useful.